So this morning session for patients is to discuss in a general way what we call the chronic miasms. Generally, we divide the whole realm of disease into three sections, you could say, roughly. The first section you're fairly familiar with has to do with the timeline. So these are the various things that can happen to you in this lifetime, what Shakespeare called the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. And then, of course, because we don't come into this world a tabula rasa, as the Enlightenment philosophers used to think, but we carry with us, of course, we know various genetic inheritances, but the genetic aspect is actually very, very small relative to another aspect of inheritance, which was discussed and known even several centuries back, but was kind of dismissed and pushed aside in the science of genetics. And that is what's known as acquired characteristics. So you can bring into this world various weaknesses that aren't genetic in nature, but of a different sort. And in homeopathy and Heilkunst, we call those chronic miasms. Now, the word miasm, as we'll see, is just an old 19th century term for a kind of bad influence, noxious influence. So I want to focus on the miasms themselves and talk a little bit about what they are specifically, and then go into the characteristics of each one so you can get a sense of what's involved. Now, of course, it's much more complex than this, and it can get very confusing after a while, but you don't need to know all of this. I think more for you want to have a sense of what exactly you're dealing with here, and once I get through the main presentation, cover the main bases, we can open it up for questions, and I'll try to answer as many as I can. So basically, what is a chronic miasm? Well, as I said, it's an acquired, inherited characteristic, but it's not genetic. In fact, the genetic side is very, very small, and even with the genetic side, in terms of the mutations and all the genetic testing, in most of those cases, it's not that severe, and if you build up the health through the regimental side, diet, nutrition, exercise, lifestyle, and you remove all of these various diseases that we can identify, in essence, you can shut off the mutation. In most cases, you can mute the mutation, as it were, to a point where it's not active. You can turn it from a red to a yellow, almost like a caution. Today, in genetic terms, they talk about epigenetic or epigenetic influences, and that's exactly what this is. It's a kind of signal, except it's not coming from the environment directly. It's coming from inside. It's something you brought into this world with you, and there's all sorts of characteristics that homeopaths learn to identify and show up even in newborn children, that these miasms are active. But again, you don't need to know those. You can more or less assume, as cultural development has shown, that we have all of these chronic miasms in us, just to a greater or lesser degree. These are like structural weaknesses. It's like buying a house, and the superstructure of the house, you could say, represents the timeline, all the various things that could go wrong. Maybe there's something wrong with the plumbing, maybe the wallpaper's peeling, maybe there's various aspects of the flooring that need to be replaced, etc. But when you're talking about the miasms, you're talking about something much more structural. It's almost like there's a crack in the foundation, and that can't be corrected by working on the superstructure. You actually have to dig out the foundation, lift up the house, and literally redo the foundation underneath the house. So this means that it's deep work, but again, it doesn't necessarily mean that the reactions, the healing reactions, are going to be stronger. The healing reactions really depend on the degree to which there is energy trapped in a given disease or force field. It's a bit like splitting the atom. You can release a tremendous amount of energy, but not every force field has a tremendous amount of energy. And that's not necessarily known in advance. But it would be fair to say that because we are going into the structural area, the structural realm, that the shifts and changes potentially could be more significant, more profound. And as we'll see, even in the miasmatic realm, there are many layers. So this can take a while, of course. Now, in the spiritual sense, if we want to look at it spiritually, we could call the chronic miasms karmic baggage. This is reflecting a lot of the issues from previous generations that have been passed on, but in a deeper spiritual sense, because you chose a particular body to incarnate into, that basically you're taking on a certain baggage that helps you or will help you to deal with a lot of old issues that you really haven't dealt with. Of course, this takes us quite far afield, and we don't need to know that, but a lot of people will refer to it that way. Now, there are two types of miasms, what we call acute or transient miasms, such as, let's say, measles or yellow fever or cholera or whooping cough. Those are also miasms, but they are acute or transient. That is, they come and they go. But the chronic or intransigent miasms are the ones that we're talking about, and these are much more profound. We have identified 8 of these miasmatic archetypes or patterns, and these should be fairly familiar to you. All of them have a name except for 2 that are relatively recognizable. The first one, Sora, is not a common name except in the sense of the term psoriasis. So it is an old term that has to do with skin issues. And as we'll see, Sora has a lot to do with skin issues. The other one, psychosis, is again a more archaic term for what we would recognize as a gonorrheal infection. So of course you can have an acute case of psoriasis or an acute case of gonorrhea, but these can be passed on to subsequent generations, not genetically, but in the sense of an acquired weakness. Of these 8, there are what we call 4 that are dominant, or major ones: Sora, tuberculosis, psychosis, and syphilis. And these are the ones that are most commonly referenced in the homeopathic literature because they're the ones that were initially discovered. Subsequently, there have been 4 others that we could say they're recessive, kind of borrowing the language from genetics. And that is malaria, ringworm, cancer, and Lyme. Now again, if we look at the tubercular miasm, let's say, or the syphilitic miasm, or malaria, ringworm, cancer, Lyme, of course we know and are more familiar with the acute expression of those. But behind the acute expression of those particular disease states lies a susceptibility. Without that susceptibility, you wouldn't be liable to catch syphilis or malaria. And this is an important thing to know simply when it comes to acute infections anyway, is that we just assume that if there's a bug going around, we're going to get it. And this creates a tremendous amount of anxiety and even fear that because there's something there, we're going to be susceptible. And to a large degree, the whole industry of vaccination depends on this fear, because the idea is that you have no protection and you're supposed to rush in and get the vaccine. But you have to have a susceptibility. And that susceptibility, of course, is not in everyone. And the healthier you are, the less susceptible you are. And the same goes for these particular miasms. So if we look at the dominant miasm and the theme, we see that Sora has the theme of lack of or poverty. These are people that see the world through a glass half empty perspective. Tuberculosis is all about restlessness, desire to change. They need to be on the move. They don't like things staying the same. They're never happy unless they're thinking about changing something or actually changing it. Psychosis has a sense of desperation, of breaking loose, of feeling trapped and trying to get out. So you can get a lot of hyperactivity, impulsivity. Syphilis has the feeling of being trapped and locked in, and this can produce a very deep state of rage and anger and destruction, almost like the Incredible Hulk reaction, in the sense of trying to smash through what they see as the concrete walls that are around them. When it comes to the recessive miasms, they also have a theme, and they have to do with the general idea of victimization. So we start out with malaria, feeling victimized. Interestingly enough, of course, malaria is associated with mosquitoes. Ringworm is a heightened state of victimization, which takes us more into the idea of persecution, being persecuted. The cancer miasm takes us into a state of resignation. Sort of like, there's nothing I can do about the attacks from the outsides. I resign myself and try to do the best I can. And then finally, Lyme gets into withdrawal. The Lyme state of mind is to get out of the world, to withdraw from the world and live kind of in a hermit existence. Now, these miasms generally relate to the seasons. Now, we tend to think we have 4 seasons, but in reality, in North America and in most places, if you look at it more subtly, there are 8 seasons. So in this case, we have early fall and late fall, early winter, late winter, etc. So you will see, if you pay attention as a practitioner, you will see these miasms showing up, indications of these miasms showing up with the seasons. Now, in any given individual, they could show up sooner or later. If you look at all of your cases, you might notice that in some people it shows up several weeks before it shows up in someone else. The other thing, as I mentioned earlier, is that there are levels of treatment. The first level involves something we call the C scale, or the centesimal scale, because it involves the centesimal numbering, like 200, 1,000, 10,000, etc. There are 4 levels there which relate to different aspects of the being, which we call the physical, etheric, astral, ontic. So the physical we know, the etheric is really where the life energy is. The astral is our emotions and feelings, and the ontic is the sense of self. So by working your way up in the potency scale, we're actually working our way up these aspects of a person's being. If the disturbance is profound enough, you have to work your way all the way up. But we have also, oh, someone said that have been bounced off. Oh, I'm back now. Okay. We also have another scale that we have discovered recently and started using, and it appears to relate to another aspect of our being. In our system, we are not single, but we are dual. We have an upper being and another being. And the C scale seems to relate to the upper being, which is what we call the incarnating being. That is the soul spiritual being that is coming down to earth. And that is the major problem for most of us, is to be properly incarnated in our body. And this is a major problem with autism, is that in those cases there is not a full incarnation. The F scale, or the Fibonacci scale, because it's based on the Fibonacci numbers, addresses the nether, or what we call the dynamic being. And this is really where our creative, generative energy comes from, and also the realm of what we call the chthonic realm, the realm of fear and anxiety. If the disturbance is deep enough, then of course it goes past the upper being and goes into the nether being, into a deeper, even more profound structural disturbance. And in certain cases, we find that we have to work our way through the F scale in order to establish balance. Of course, how far we have to go and whether we have to use just the C scale or the F scale depends on each case. It's not, we're not able to know in advance how we have to go. Okay, so if we look at Sora, this is just a picture to give you kind of a graphic image. These are people that often live on the streets. This is the extreme, and you have to see the extreme in order to keep the idea. Or hoarders, if you see the TV series on hoarding, these people have a very profound degree of Sora, the Soric miasm in them. It has an element of has an element of dryness as well at the physical level. So dry skin, dry eyes, a lot of thirst, etc. Mainly shows up on the skin in this case, and so we get the word psoriasis. They're often sick. They seem to catch everything going around. They're very pessimistic, and they have a lot of health concerns. These are just some examples. I won't go through them in great detail. What I'll do at the end is I'll set this up so you can download this PDF file so you can study this at more leisure on your own. There's a question there. Can you do both scales at the same time? Generally not, because you're addressing things sequentially, and you could say the incarnation has to be done before the excarnation, or the what we call the ascent. Take me a long time to explain that, but no, generally we would not do that. Okay, malaria, victimized. So here you have a picture of people feeling hard done by, the world's always bugging them, bothering them. You know, in a sense, they feel victims. Always complaining, tiredness, affects the liver and spleen, of course, appetite, digestion, all of these things are affected. Tuberculosis, we have restlessness. They're always on the move, always traveling. So people who sell everything and get a boat or a caravan or a recreational vehicle and travel around the world have a strong element of tuberculosis. Change is as good as a rest. They can change jobs, they can change houses, they can change furniture, they're always dreaming about traveling, or they feel good even planning to travel. I know when I was treated for this miasm, I know it's in my family, but it never seemed to be an issue for me until I got to the 4th level of the miasms. And when I went through tuberculinum, I found myself looking at all the travel magazines and the cruise ships and stuff I would normally never be interested in, suddenly found fascinating. But that's a reflection of the tubercular state of mind. In children, you get it in the sense of the angel child, devil child. They have this kind of mischievous gleam in their eye and do things that are basically destructive, and yet they seem such a sweet child. In adults, they have an element of being romantic, and they tend to romanticize things. They're known for their flashy, stylish clothing, and they can even have a certain amount of OCD-like behavior already. Ringworm, sense of persecution. That it's not just mosquitoes anymore, but the world's out to kill you, in a sense. That's the feeling. And so there's a great deal of hesitation. Now, this is a classic ringworm eruption on the skin, which many children, certainly when I grew up, many children had. And if it wasn't treated, it just went away, seemingly, although the underlying disease state remained. Or if it was treated with some kind of antifungal treatment, it would just have suppressed it. Now, it's interesting that ringworm is associated with seasonal affective disorder, or SAD, as it's referred to. A lot of depression in late winter, because that's a ringworm season, end of January, all of February, and into early March. Interesting that chocolate, of course, pure chocolate is very good at, you could say, mitigating and palliating seasonal affective disorder. But these people feel caught in a kind of, I want to get out, but I can't. They have the desire to make a change, but they feel they can't do it. They feel they're not able, or they're somehow trapped, because the world, in a sense, is out to get them. So in that sense, they don't really want to break out. So again, these are some examples of the ringworm state of mind, which I put in more detail here because you don't find that so much in the regular homeopathic literature. There's a certain amount of negativity, being in a funk, as I say, all summed up in this seasonal affective disorder. Psychosis, we get hyperness, hyperactivity. So we could say this is kind of like sex, drugs, rock and roll, in the sense of excess. Nothing exceeds like excess. And impulsivity, constantly on the move. There's no direction to it. It's not productive. It's like people with attention deficit disorder, rushing around, multitasking, thinking they're being very efficient, but in reality very inefficient. There's a lot of hay fever, spring allergy symptoms, discharges, various inflammatory condition, all the itises, warts, a lot of things that on the outside are associated with psychosis. Extreme sports, extreme emotions, everything's in extreme. They call it being passionate about something, but the word passion actually has the meaning of painful. And So we think when we're passionate about something, that's a good thing. But to be passionate is actually an extreme. It's an imbalance. So they are passionate, but there's a certain suffering involved in that. And they can be aggressive if they are crossed, if you get in the way, as it were. They're night people. They're just getting started. They love parties and nightclubs and dancing, and they need discharge of their energy, or if they don't get it, then the body will discharge it physically. Cancer or resignation. These are people who generally sublimate their energy in terms of caring for everyone else except for themselves. And this is a known state of mind, mental emotional state for cancer patients, even in the conventional sense, is that they're very pleasant. Even if they're dying of cancer and you go visit them, they're always curious about how you're doing and how your life is going, and everything's fine, and don't be bothered on their account. This is the cancer state of mind. Now, there's a lot of other things associated with that, of course, and some of these things you'll find will overlap, but this is somebody who puts themselves last, essentially. People who volunteer or over-volunteer, they take care of everybody else, make sure everything's wonderful for everybody else, but they neglect to take care of themselves. And in doing so, they run themselves down. They do have a passion for dancing and music, like psychosis, and they love excitement and energy, particularly thunderstorms and lightning storms, because it allows a certain amount of discharge as well. Okay, a lot of fears and anxieties, very sensitive, easily upset. Syphilis, something that we can recognize again in our society today, very destructive. People who do tattoos or puncture their body in various ways, put rings in, etc. I mean, some of it's culturally acceptable, but when it goes to extremes, then it's something beyond the cultural expression or need. This expresses a deep kind of self-destructive nature, and that's what they'll do. Alcoholism, drug addiction, all of these things are coming from the syphilitic miasm. That's why a lot of studies you see show that heroin, cocaine, marijuana, all of these so-called recreational drugs, illegal drugs, are not necessarily addictive, and nobody explains when they are addictive and when they aren't. But it's not in the drug itself, it's in the person taking the drug. So those who have a syphilitic miasm very strongly in them are going to be prone to addiction. Doesn't matter whether it's alcohol or sex or various drugs, and legal or illegal, they're going to become addicted. They have a tendency to do that. Emotionally, the person can let everything in their life crash down around them, and mentally they can go further into insanity. So it's kind of the doorway into the mental institutions and hospitals. Physically, there's an erosion of bones, dissolving of muscles, bone pains, what at night are called growing pains. This is an early indication in children that they have the syphilitic miasm in them. Wounds that don't heal, they ulcerate, they're worse at night, they dread the night, they don't want to sleep. There can be all sorts of physical distortions in the body as a result of that. So we get birth defects. Various birth defects are indicative of the syphilitic miasm. Now this is interesting, where psychosis might sink into a depression and threaten suicide. It's only really the syphilitic patient that will go through with it. So this is why we have a lot of statistics on people who threaten suicide, but very few actually go through with it. You have to have a very strong self-destructive syphilitic nature to override the life program that is in you to keep you alive. Then with Lyme, we have self-denial. This is the hermit, someone who goes off and lives in their own world, doesn't want to be bothered by the world around them because they don't like it, it's not safe. So a kind of withdrawal from society. So we could say, in a way, this is a picture of autism, but of course the autistic condition includes all of the different miasms, but it's most fully expressed in the Lyme miasm. Now it's interesting, there's a lot of concern about Lyme today because it is endemic and there's no cure for it. Of course, it can be treated, and it is treated conventionally using antibiotics. But it's important to realize that antibiotics are not a cure. What antibiotics do is they suppress the expression or the symptoms of the Lyme disease, but it doesn't cure in this case, the spirochete that causes Lyme. It just goes into a kind of dormant state. And then under some kind of stress down the road, it will break out again. And the problem here is that because the symptoms are gone, you are lured and lulled into a sense of complacency that the problem is solved, when in reality the Lyme disease is still there. It's just not producing any symptoms. And yet it's burrowing itself deeper and undermining your system even more. So next time when it shows up, it's even stronger. This is a bit like multiple sclerosis, which can go through various phases of latency, and then it seems to be gone, and then it comes roaring back again, this time a bit worse than the last time. So I know people worry a lot about Lyme, and it is something to be taken seriously, but remember that antibiotics are not a treatment. Oh, missed most of the Lyme. Okay. Yes, you can watch this again. It has been recorded, or is being recorded. Would you be able to go back? You mean over the Lyme? I can try to go back over the Lyme. Hang on. Okay, is my voice now okay? I don't want to go back over it if it's still skipping a lot. It's still breaking up. Okay. Let me just check my... Okay, if it's breaking up, I don't know what I'm gonna... I'm going to switch, so I'm going to be disconnect for a bit. I'm going to switch to my other internet service because it may be the internet service itself. So if I get disconnected, internet is still wonky here. There's no point in going back over it. This has been recorded, so you can, once it's done and Jason posts the connection, you can go back and listen to it. I was going to take questions, but if the sound isn't very good, I don't know if that's still worth it. Other than that, it will be recorded. Okay, I will continue. So It's frustrating. It's unfortunate. There's something going on here because I switched to my other internet user. I'm back now. Okay, Mercury, Lyme, these are all occurrence, these influences that affect us. Okay, if people can, let's just go to the questions. If people can pose questions. In the meantime, while we're waiting for that, I will set it up so that you can download this file. I think I'm back now. Again, I got bumped off, so I'm going to try to upload this file again. There we go. Hopefully, this will be the last bump. Okay, does anyone have any questions based on this that they wanted to ask? Any questions? Usually, if one person has a question, can a person have multiple miasms? Yes. In fact, basically, you can assume with about 98% certainty that we have all of the 8 miasms, everyone. Now, you may have one more than another, and you may have some in very small amounts, but basically, when we treat people, we discover that they more or less have all of the 8 miasms. Would like to know which miasm, if any, is associated with crooked bones, teeth, tilted hips, etc. That's generally the syphilitic miasm. Yes, you can remineralize. The key here is to, the conventional medical view has long been very static. And the idea was that it was hard to regenerate anything. Your teeth couldn't regenerate, your bones couldn't regenerate. Of course, that flew in the face of evidence that, bones can heal. But the general idea is that you can't regenerate. However, our experience is that if you remove the blockages, the body's life energy is very good at regenerating. It takes time, but it definitely can be done. Can a healing reaction last for a long time? Months, yes, but even on the timeline, clearing timeline events, you can have certain healing reactions, low grade, that can last for months, or even acute ones. The issue here is more that certain symptoms are associated with more than one particular kind of disease. So you may have like an ear discharge or a hyperactivity or a skin rash that might persist for months. Not because it's still a healing reaction to a clear you did months ago, but because it's associated with other clears that you're still working on. And the same is the situation with respect to miasms. If you have a child that's very hyper, will treating the miasms chill that out? Well, hyperactivity is not just associated with miasms. You can have food coloring that produces hyperactivity. You can have certain foods. You can have emotional events. All sorts of things feed into hyperactivity. It's almost impossible to narrow a given symptom or behavior to one thing. But yes, definitely there can be a miasmatic, and there often is a miasmatic root. Now, if the hyperactivity is extreme enough and other symptomology shows up, you can treat for the psychotic miasm, for example, that might help in the short term deal with the hyperactivity, but you can get hyperactivity in other miasms as well. It's not quite as simple as that, but definitely the psychotic miasm has the issue of hyperactivity in a greater way than the other miasms. Can a loss of money happening at the same time of year for years be related to a miasm? Yes. This in our system is what we call occurrence. There is nothing in this world that's an accident. There are no accidents. Everything has a deeper meaning, even if we don't understand what it is. So if we get a rear-end collision, if we keep losing our job, if we keep having things repetitively happen, and certainly if they're happening on a seasonal basis, that is indicative of an underlying miasmatic disorder or disease that needs to be addressed. Are Lyme, Bartonella, Babesia infections related to specific miasm in autism? Well, the Bartonella, Babesia, it just scale or the F scale first. Well, we always start with the C scale, what we could call the soul spiritual domain. So many of us can be trapped in the physical, and we psychotic-like behavior that's generated by fear. Of course, it doesn't. I don't need to do anything. I don't need to pay attention to anyone. All of okay, yeah. The sound, you just have to come back in and listen to it again. I can't control the sound right now. If a parent was treated for particular miasms after children are born, do the children have to be treated for the same? Generally, yes, but we treat everybody for all the miasms because it's pretty rare that they're not there. If so, I see the sound is creating problems again. Okay, I don't, again, my connection shows it's working. So I don't know why the sound is so bad today, unless it has to do with Adobe.